I'm Martha Reynolds, 56 years old, and this morning started like most others in our small home. My granddaughter Lily padded into my bedroom, still in her unicorn pajamas. "Grandma, I don't feel well. Can I stay home today?" she whispered. I touched her forehead and noticed it was warm. Something in her eyes seemed off. Not sickness, but fear. After letting her stay, I found a hidden permission slip about a family tree project. The paper trembled in my hands as realization dawned. Before I tell you how my world collapsed after that morning, where are you watching from? Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever had to fight for someone you love. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happens next. I never planned to be raising an 8-year-old in my 50s. My retirement was supposed to be filled with gardening, book clubs, and occasional substitute teaching. But life rarely follows our carefully laid plans. My daughter Samantha, beautiful, bright Samantha, fell into addiction after a car accident left her with chronic pain and a prescription for opioids. Within 2 years, she went from taking prescribed medication to buying pills on the street. By the time Lily was 3, Samantha was in no condition to care for herself, let alone a toddler. Her husband Richard initially stepped up, juggling his job as a real estate developer and single parenthood. I helped whenever I could, watching Lily during his business trips and late meetings. Then he met Denise, a pharmaceutical sales representative, at a business conference. Within 6 months, they were married, and suddenly my level of involvement became interference rather than help. My husband Frank was still alive then. He'd always been the peacemaker in family conflicts, the voice of reason when emotions ran high. "Give them space, Martha," he'd say. "They're figuring out their new normal." I tried to follow his advice, stepping back even though every instinct told me Lily needed consistency. Then Frank's heart attack changed everything. One day he was planting tomatoes in our backyard garden, and the next, I was planning his funeral. My grief was overwhelming, but I had little time to process it because within weeks of his death, Richard was at my door with Lily and 2 suitcases. "It's just temporary," he assured me. "Denise and I need to travel for work. And Lily needs stability right now." Temporary became permanent. My retirement savings, meant to sustain Frank and me through our golden years, began dwindling as I covered Lily's needs. Richard's monthly contributions were inconsistent at best, non-existent at worst. The custody arrangement evolved informally at first. Lily stayed with me during the week, then with Richard and Denise on weekends. Eventually, we formalized it through family court, with me gaining primary custody. I thought this would bring some security, but it only marked the beginning of Richard's campaign against me. It started subtly. Lily would return from weekend visits with questions. "Grandma, why don't you have a swimming pool like Daddy?" Or "Denise says your house is old and probably has lead paint. Is that why you get confused sometimes?" I brushed these comments off until the day Lily came home and asked, "Grandma, is it true you used to hit Mommy when she was little?" My blood ran cold. I had never laid a hand on Samantha, or any child in my 30 years of teaching. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I found a notebook in her backpack with a list titled, "Things Wrong with Grandma's House," in handwriting too neat to belong to an 8-year-old. The next betrayal hit even harder. My sister Patricia had always been competitive with me, but we maintained a cordial relationship for family harmony. When I called to vent about Richard's manipulations, her response left me speechless. "Well, Martha, maybe Richard has a point. You're not young anymore, and raising a child is demanding. Perhaps Lily would be better off in a more conventional home environment." 2 days later, I saw Patricia having lunch with Richard and Denise at the local cafe. They didn't notice me watching through the window as Patricia handed Richard a folder that looked suspiciously like the one containing our mother's will and family documents I'd shared with her years ago. That evening, I received an email from Richard's attorney. They were filing for full custody, citing concerns about my advancing age and possible cognitive decline. The evidence? Family anecdotes that could only have come from Patricia, who had resented me since childhood when our mother relied on me more after our father left. The betrayal stung like alcohol on an open wound. My own sister, the person who shared my history and should have been my ally, had become my adversary in the most important battle of my life. "I don't understand how you could do this," I said to Patricia across the small table at Riverside Cafe. I'd chosen a public place, hoping it would force us both to remain civil. The coffee between us had grown cold, untouched. Patricia's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against the ceramic mug. You always were dramatic, Martha. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm thinking of Lily. By feeding Richard lies about our childhood? By telling him I was abusive to Samantha? My voice cracked despite my determination to stay composed. Were they lies? Patricia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. You were always Mom's favorite, the perfect daughter, the dedicated teacher everyone adored. Meanwhile, I was just there, in your shadow. That's not true, I protested, though the bitterness in her voice suggested this resentment had been festering for decades. Isn't it? And now you've got Lily, playing the saintly grandmother. Richard and Denise can give her opportunities you can't. They're young, they have resources. They don't love her like I do, I said simply. Patricia's laugh was cold. Love doesn't pay for college, Martha. Besides, Richard says you're becoming forgetful. Leaving the stove on. Missing appointments. I stared at my sister, suddenly seeing a stranger. None of that is true, and you know it. Do I? She gathered her purse and stood. The court will decide what's best for Lily. Not you, not your sentimentality. 3 days later, I sat in the office of Janet Prescott, a family law attorney recommended by a former colleague. The consultation fee had nearly emptied my checking account, but I had no choice. These allegations are serious, Janet said, reviewing Richard's filing. Her office was cramped but orderly, much like Janet herself, compact, efficient, and no nonsense. They're claiming you've exhibited signs of cognitive impairment, creating an unsafe environment. It's completely fabricated, I insisted. Unfortunately, fabricated or not, we have to address it. Family court isn't like criminal court. The standard isn't beyond reasonable doubt. It's preponderance of evidence and best interest of the child. Richard has money, a stable marriage, and youth on his side. And I have the truth, I said firmly. Janet's expression softened slightly. The truth helps, but we need documentation, witnesses, and evidence to counter their claims. She outlined the process ahead: psychological evaluations, home studies, character witnesses, all expensive and invasive. As I left Janet's office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Emergency custody hearing scheduled for Friday. Richard claiming you threatened self-harm. Court documents delivered to your home today. My legs nearly gave way beneath me. I had said no such thing. Ever. When I arrived home, I found my neighbor Barbara waiting on my porch, looking uncomfortable. Barbara and I had shared countless cups of tea and garden tips over the 6 years we'd been neighbors. Her grandchildren often played with Lily. Martha, she began, not quite meeting my eyes. I need to tell you something. Over the next 20 minutes, Barbara confessed that Richard had approached her months ago, offering to pay off her considerable medical debts if she would keep an eye on me and report anything that could be construed as negligent or concerning. She'd been photographing my home, noting my comings and goings, and reporting to Richard weekly. He said it was for Lily's protection, Barbara explained, tears welling. But when I heard about the emergency hearing, I couldn't be part of it anymore. He's twisting everything I've reported. The betrayal cut deep. My home, my sanctuary, had been under surveillance by someone I trusted. I thanked Barbara for her honesty, then closed the door and slid to the floor, finally allowing the tears to come. My phone rang. It was Grace Lewis, my former teaching colleague and one of my oldest friends. Martha? I just heard from Susan at the school board. Richard's been telling people you have early onset dementia. He approached the principal about having Lily transferred, claiming you often forget to pick her up. Grace's steady voice became my lifeline. I don't know what's happening, but I'm on your way over. We'll figure this out together. By the time Grace arrived, I'd discovered that Richard had been systematically turning my community against me. He'd spoken to my doctor. Though how he'd accessed my medical information remained a mystery, my pastor, and several parents from Lily's school. The web of deception was vast and meticulously planned, I was facing not just Richard and Denise, but an entire orchestrated campaign designed to strip me of my granddaughter. The preliminary hearing took place in a cramped courtroom with harsh fluorescent lighting that highlighted every worry line on my face. Richard and Denise sat opposite me, both impeccably dressed. Denise's hand rested protectively over her slightly rounded stomach, a detail their attorney made sure to emphasize. The expectant parents versus the aging grandmother. Judge Harriet Thompson peered over her reading glasses, scanning the emergency filing. "These are concerning allegations, Mrs. Reynolds." My attorney Janet responded calmly. "Allegations that are entirely unfounded, Your Honor. My client has been the primary caregiver for Lily Reynolds for 3 years with no incidents." Richard's attorney, an expensively suited man named Bradley Wilson, stood. "Your Honor, we have documentation of Mrs. Reynolds' increasingly erratic behavior." He presented a folder of evidence. A report from Lily's teacher noting that I had arrived late for pickup twice in the past month. Statements from neighbors about unusual behavior. Even pharmacy records showing I had filled prescriptions for sleep aids and anxiety medication following my husband's death. Furthermore, Wilson continued, Mrs. Reynolds recently made alarming statements about not wanting to go on if Lily were taken from her. We believe this indicates potential for self-harm or, more concerning, harm to the child. That's an absolute lie. I couldn't stop myself from standing. Janet pulled me back down, whispering urgently to control my reactions. Judge Thompson frowned. "Mrs. Reynolds' outbursts will not be tolerated in my courtroom." The hearing continued with character assassination disguised as concern. Every normal aspect of grief and single parenthood was twisted into evidence of instability. When the court-appointed evaluator presented findings from her interview with Lily, my heart shattered. Lily expresses concern that her grandmother often seems confused, the evaluator stated. She reports instances of forgotten meals, missed school assignments, and her grandmother sometimes calling her by her mother's name. I recognized Richard's coaching in these statements. Lily had occasionally missed turning in homework. What 8-year-old hasn't? And yes, in moments of distraction, I'd called her Samantha once or twice, a slip any mother might make. But forgotten meals? Never. Just as it seemed the judge was leaning toward granting Richard temporary custody, Janet produced my complete medical records, including a cognitive assessment performed just 3 months earlier during my annual physical records I had authorized her to obtain after our consultation. As you can see, Your Honor, Mrs. Reynolds shows no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. Her physician notes she is in excellent health for her age, with no concerns about her capacity to care for her granddaughter. Judge Thompson studied the records, her expression unreadable. The momentary relief I felt was shattered when the courtroom door opened and my brother Michael entered. I hadn't seen Michael in nearly 2 years, not since our disagreement over selling our parents' home, which he'd wanted to liquidate for his struggling business. Your Honor, Wilson said, we've called Mrs. Reynolds' brother Michael as a witness to her history of emotional instability. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes as he took the stand. Under Wilson's questioning, he described me as always high-strung and prone to emotional outbursts. He referenced an incident from my college years when I'd sought counseling for anxiety, twisting a normal, healthy decision to address stress into evidence of long-term mental health issues. She's always been possessive, Michael testified. First with our mother, now with Lily. Martha needs to be in control, even at others' expense. Each word was a knife. My own brother, rewriting our shared history to paint me as unstable. The motivation became clear when Wilson asked about recent financial transactions, and Michael admitted I had refused to loan him money from my retirement savings I was using to care for Lily. By the end of the 4-hour hearing, I felt emotionally battered. Judge Thompson denied Richard's request for emergency custody, but granted him increased visitation and temporary shared decision-making power for medical and educational matters, a significant reduction of my authority as AETIS, primary custodian. Additionally, she added, Mrs. Reynolds will undergo a comprehensive psychological evaluation and home study. As we left the courtroom, Richard brushed past me. This is just the beginning, he murmured, too quietly for others to hear. You should consider Lily's best interests and step aside gracefully. I watched him join Denise, his arms sliding around her waist as they walked away victorious. They had connections, resources, and apparently half my family on their side. But they had underestimated one thing: how fiercely a grandmother would fight for her granddaughter. The court battles had depleted my savings and my energy, but I refused to surrender. If Richard and my own family were conspiring against me, I needed to understand why. "Follow the money," Grace suggested during one of our strategy sessions at my kitchen table. "People don't usually orchestrate elaborate schemes unless there's something valuable at stake." I began with what I knew about Richard's finances. As Samantha's husband, he'd always projected an image of success: luxury car, designer clothes, lavish gifts. But I remembered Samantha once mentioning his creative accounting and tendency to overextend himself. Through public records and with help from Grace's son-in-law who worked in banking, I discovered Richard's real estate ventures had collapsed during the economic downturn. He'd taken out multiple high-interest loans to stay afloat, using properties as collateral, including putting a second mortgage on the house where he and Denise now lived. "He's underwater," Grace's son-in-law explained. "If he doesn't find substantial capital soon, he'll lose everything." But what did that have to do with custody of Lily? The connection eluded me until I reviewed my husband's will and our property documents. Frank had left everything to me, including our fully paid home and a modest life insurance policy. More importantly, he'd established a small trust for Lily's education that would mature when she turned 18. If Richard gained custody of Lily, would he also gain control of her trust? It seemed possible, even likely. But that amount wouldn't solve his financial problems. There had to be more. I remembered a conversation with my husband years ago about adding Lily as a beneficiary to our home in case something happened to both of us. Had we completed that paperwork? I searched through our files but found nothing conclusive. Late one night, unable to sleep, I called my cousin Linda, who worked at the local bank where we'd done business for decades. I hesitated to involve another family member given recent betrayals, but Linda and I had been close since childhood. "Martha," Linda's voice was strained when she called back the next day. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but someone accessed your account information last month. It wasn't through normal channels. Was it Richard?" Her silence was answer enough. "Linda, please. This is about Lily's future." "It wasn't just Richard," she finally said. "I helped him. He said he was concerned about your mental state and needed to protect Lily's inheritance. He offered to help Jonathan." Jonathan was Linda's son, who'd been struggling with unemployment. Another betrayal. I ended the call and sat in my garden, trying to process this new information. That evening, Linda arrived at my door, visibly distressed. "I'm sorry, Martha. Richard showed me court documents claiming he'd been awarded financial oversight. I didn't verify them properly." She handed me a folder. "Here's everything he accessed. He was particularly interested in your property deed and Frank's insurance policy." The documents confirmed my suspicions. Richard had discovered that our home had appreciated significantly in value and that Frank had named Lily as a contingent beneficiary on his life insurance policy, with me as the trustee, until she turned 25. If Richard gained full custody and could prove me unfit, he could petition to replace me as trustee. Combined with the home equity, it would be enough to temporarily solve his financial problems. My investigation took another turn when I received an unexpected call from my niece Rebecca, Patricia's daughter. We'd always been close despite the tension between her mother and me. "Aunt Martha, there's something you should know," she said hesitantly. "Mom doesn't know I'm calling you." We met at a coffee shop the next town over, where Rebecca revealed the most shocking betrayal yet. "Richard and we've been seeing each other. It started at a family gathering last Christmas. He said his marriage to Denise was just for show, that they had an understanding." My mind reeled. "Does your mother know?" Rebecca nodded miserably. "She found out a month ago. That's when Richard convinced her to help with the custody case. He threatened to tell everyone about us if she didn't cooperate. Mom's terrified of the scandal, especially with her church position. The pieces were falling into place. Richard was manipulating everyone around me, exploiting vulnerabilities and creating a network of allies through coercion and false promises. The final confirmation came from an unexpected source. My friend Judith, who who worked in the county records office, called after seeing Richard's name on some recently filed documents. "Martha, he's listed your home as collateral for a business loan. The paperwork claims he has power of attorney for you. The signature. It doesn't look right." My hands trembled as I processed this information. Richard hadn't just been gathering evidence to gain custody of Lily, he'd been laying groundwork to take everything I had. "Document everything," Janet advised during our strategy session. "Every interaction with Richard, every conversation with Lily, every unusual occurrence. Courts respond to patterns and evidence, not emotions." I transformed my spare bedroom into a war room. Calendar notations tracked Richard's visitation compliance. Journals documented Lily's behavior before and after weekend visits. I installed a call recording app on my phone, with Janet's guidance on legal disclosure requirements, and saved every text message and email. The court-ordered psychological evaluation loomed over me. Dr. Melissa Chen, the appointed psychologist, had a reputation for thoroughness. I spent hours preparing, reviewing my medical history, and practicing calm responses to potential provocative questions. "Don't try to be perfect," Grace coached. "Be honest about your challenges and how you address them." Perfect people raise suspicion. Meanwhile, Richard and Denise escalated their community campaign. Parents at Lily's school suddenly stopped inviting her to playdates. Checkout clerks at the grocery store gave me concerned looks. My church prayer group leader suggested I take time for myself rather than continuing my regular participation. The isolation strategy was effective and devastating. One afternoon, I ran into my pastor at the pharmacy. "Martha," Pastor Jim said, his voice lowered, "I've heard concerning things. If you're struggling with Lily, perhaps it would be best to let her father take a larger role. Sometimes surrender is the most loving choice." "What exactly have you heard, Pastor?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. He looked uncomfortable. "Richard and Denise have shared some incidents. Lily coming to school unfed, medication errors, angry outbursts. And you believed them without speaking to me first? They provided documentation, Martha. From Lily's teacher, from neighbors. I later learned that Mrs. Wilson, Lily's teacher, had been reporting directly to Richard, violating school protocol. The documentation consisted of normal 8-year-old behaviors, a forgotten homework assignment, a tantrum over bedtime, reframed as evidence of my negligence. The betrayal that cut deepest came from Donna Mitchell, my friend of 15 years who worked as an administrative assistant at Lily's school. She had been providing Richard with copies of Lily's records and private notes from teacher meetings. When confronted, Donna burst into tears. Richard said they're concerned about Lily's regression. He convinced me it was for her welfare. She couldn't meet my eyes. His attorney's brother sits on the school board, Martha. My job was at stake. With each discovery, I felt more isolated. Grace remained steadfast, as did Janet and a handful of former colleagues, but most of my support system had been systematically dismantled. Then Lily came home from a weekend visit with troubling news. Daddy said we're moving to Arizona after he gets custody. He said you're too sick to take care of me anymore, but I can visit when you're better. That evening, I nearly surrendered to despair. Sitting in Frank's old armchair, surrounded by family photos, I considered whether Lily might indeed be better off without the stress of this ongoing battle. Perhaps I should negotiate for generous visitation and step aside. As if sensing my moment of weakness, the phone rang. It was Judith from my grandparents' support group. "Martha, don't you dare give up," she said without preamble. "I went through this 3 years ago with my daughter and son-in-law. They nearly broke me. But I fought back. Now my grandson is thriving with me, and the court sees through their manipulations." "How did you do it?" I asked, grasping for hope. "One day at a time. With documentation, with support, and by playing the long game. They expect you to break. That's their strategy. Outlast them." Her words rekindled my determination. That night, I outlined a comprehensive counterattack strategy with Janet. We would methodically address each allegation while building our own case, showing Richard's true motivations. When the psychological evaluation results came back inconclusive, finding no evidence of cognitive impairment, but noting situational anxiety consistent with current stressors, Richard's attorney immediately filed to have the Evaluation redone with a different psychologist. The judge denied this request but ordered a home study, where a court-appointed evaluator would observe my interactions with Lily and assess our living environment. I prepared meticulously, not by creating an artificial showcase home, but by ensuring the evaluator would see our authentic daily life, organized but lived in, with evidence of Lily's creativity, our shared activities, and her overall well-being. The home study went smoothly until the evaluator asked Lily about weekend visits with her father. "Sometimes I get scared," Lily admitted. "Daddy and Denise tell me if I live with them, I'll have new brothers and sisters and more toys. But they also say Grandma might go away to a special hospital because her brain is sick." The evaluator's expression remained neutral, but she made extensive notes. Later, she asked for copies of all documentation regarding Richard's allegations about my health. That evening, after Lily was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing our strategy. The psychological evaluation hadn't provided Richard with the ammunition he'd hoped for. The home study seemed positive overall. My documentation was thorough and organized, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard had more maneuvers planned. He had resources, connections, and desperation driving him. I was running out of funds and emotional reserves. The doorbell rang just after 9 p.m. Standing on my porch was Frank's old business partner, a man I hadn't seen since the funeral. He held a thick folder and wore an expression of grave concern. "Martha, we need to talk about Richard Reynolds, and you need to hear this tonight." The morning after Frank's business partner, Lewis, revealed Richard's history of financial misconduct, I received an email that sent me straight to Lily's school. Richard had submitted paperwork to transfer Lily to Lakeside Academy, an expensive private school on the other side of town, without my knowledge or consent. Principal Carol Wilson greeted me with visible discomfort in her office, a space decorated with student artwork and motivational posters about integrity and teamwork, values that seemed absent from our interaction. "Mrs. Reynolds, I understand your concern, but Mr. Reynolds provided documentation showing he has educational decision-making authority." She slid a court order across her desk. I examined the document closely. "This is from our preliminary hearing. It grants shared decision-making, not unilateral authority. Any educational changes require my consent." Principal Wilson shifted nervously. "Our district legal counsel advised that shared means either parent can make decisions." "I'm her legal guardian, not her parent," I corrected, "and that interpretation directly contradicts the judge's intent. I'll have my attorney clarify with the court immediately." Carol's demeanor changed subtly. "Martha, off the record, this situation is putting the school in a difficult position. Richard Reynolds has connections on the school board and with major district donors. The transfer might be best for everyone involved." I leaned forward. "Are you suggesting I should allow my granddaughter to be moved away from her friends, her support system, and her home because it's politically expedient for the school?" The confrontation escalated when Richard and Denise arrived, apparently summoned by someone in the office. Richard's practiced concern contrasted with Denise's barely concealed hostility. "Martha, you're making a scene," Richard chided, as if addressing a misbehaving child. "We're trying to provide Lily with educational opportunities you simply can't afford. Without consulting me, without considering her emotional well-being or the disruption to her life," I countered, maintaining my composure despite the ambush. "This is exactly the irrational behavior we've been concerned about," Denise interjected, glancing meaningfully at Principal Wilson. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion with the district superintendent and our attorney present." "I couldn't agree more," I replied, gathering my belongings. "In fact, let's include the court-appointed guardian ad litem in that conversation, since educational stability is explicitly mentioned in their mandate." As I turned to leave, Richard grabbed my arm. "You're fighting a losing battle, Martha. I have resources you don't." I removed his hand firmly. "And I have truth you don't. Plus documentation of this attempt to violate our court order." That evening, Lily returned from school unusually quiet and withdrawn. After gentle questioning, she revealed that her teacher, Mrs. Wilson, had taken her aside to discuss her new school adventure and suggested she should be excited about living with Daddy and Denise full-time soon. I documented the inappropriate conversation while maintaining a positive demeanor for Lily's benefit. Inside, I was seething. They were manipulating an 8-year-old child, causing her anxiety and confusion to advance their agenda. The following day brought another shock. My friend Donna, who worked in the school office, called during her lunch break. "Martha, I need to tell you something, but you can't reveal I told you." Her voice trembled. "Richard's been meeting with Mrs. Wilson for weeks. I overheard them discussing Lily's records and— Martha, I'm so sorry. I've been giving him copies of Lily's progress reports and attendance records." "You've what?" I struggled to process this latest betrayal. He said he was concerned about patterns that might indicate neglect. He had custody paperwork that seemed to authorize access. Donna's voice broke. "I didn't realize until yesterday that he was only showing partial documents. When I questioned him, he implied my job could be at risk if I created unnecessary complications." Another strand in Richard's web of manipulation. He had leveraged Donna's job insecurity and our friendship to gain unauthorized access to confidential information he was almost certainly misrepresenting to build his case. That afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with Superintendent Garcia, bringing both Janet and the documentation Lewis had provided about Richard's financial motivations. The superintendent, a no-nonsense educator with 30 years' experience, listened carefully. "This isn't the first time Richard Reynolds has attempted to circumvent district policy," she noted after reviewing my evidence. "Last year, there was an incident involving improper influence with the athletic department at the high school. With the superintendent's support, I filed a formal complaint about the unauthorized transfer attempt and Mrs. Wilson's inappropriate conversation with Lily. The complaint triggered a district investigation and temporarily halted any transfer proceedings. Richard's response was swift and vicious. 2 days later, a Child Protective Services worker arrived at my door, investigating allegations of educational neglect and medical negligence. According to the report, I had been withholding necessary psychological treatment from Lily and deliberately sabotaging her education. The CPS investigation required a complete home inspection, interviews with Lily and me separately, and contact with her medical providers. Though professionally conducted, the process was humiliating and traumatic for both of us. "Why does everyone keep asking if you're mean to me, Grandma?" Lily asked one night, her voice small in the darkness of her bedroom. "Daddy says I should tell them about the bad things, but there aren't any bad things." I held her close, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes adults disagree about what's best for children. All these questions are to make sure everyone has the information they need to make good decisions. "I wish they would just ask me what I want," she whispered before falling asleep. Her simple wisdom cut through the complex legal maneuvers. In all the court filings, evaluations, and investigations, Lily's voice had been filtered through adult interpretations and agendas. She had become a prize to be won rather than a child to be protected. As the CPS investigation concluded with no findings of concern, I felt momentarily victorious. Then Janet called with sobering news. "Richard's filed an emergency motion, alleging you've been coaching Lily to lie to investigators and alienating her from him. He's requesting temporary custody, pending a full hearing." The endless accusations and legal attacks were taking their toll. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat on the back porch Frank had built, questioning whether I had the strength to continue. The financial and emotional resources required seemed insurmountable. Perhaps Richard would eventually wear me down through sheer persistence and financial advantage. As these thoughts threatened to overwhelm me, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Martha, it's Rebecca. We need to talk. Richard's desperation is making him dangerous." I have proof. Frank's former business partner, Lewis, had opened my eyes to Richard's financial desperation, but it was Rebecca's evidence that truly changed the game. We met at a cafe in the neighboring town, where she nervously slid a USB drive across the table. "He doesn't know I made copies," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "These are emails between Richard and his attorney, planning the custody strategy. They explicitly discuss using Lily to access your assets." I stared at the small device that potentially held the key to protecting Lily. "Rebecca, how did you get these?" "Richard stays at my apartment sometimes. He uses my laptop when he's there." Her eyes welled with tears. "I thought he loved me, but I'm just another pawn to him. When I saw the emails about Lily, about you, I couldn't be part of it anymore. Janet reviewed the emails with clinical precision. This is compelling evidence of bad faith, but we need to be careful. The emails were obtained without Richard's knowledge or consent, which raises admissibility issues. While Janet developed a strategy for legally leveraging the information, I received an unexpected call from Richard's former business partner, Frank Jones. "Mrs. Reynolds, we haven't met, but I was in business with Richard until last year. I've been following your case through mutual connections." His voice was gruff but concerned. "There are things about Richard's business practices you should know." We met the following day at Janet's office. Frank brought financial records documenting a pattern of fraud that spanned years: fabricated investment opportunities, misappropriated client funds, and tax evasion that had triggered an IRS investigation. "Richard burned through his legitimate assets years ago," Frank explained. "He's been staying afloat by constantly finding new sources of capital, usually other people's money. When I discovered he'd used company funds to cover personal gambling debts, I dissolved our partnership." "Why are you coming forward now?" Janet asked, justifiably suspicious. "The IRS contacted me last week. Their investigation has expanded, and I need to protect myself." He hesitated. "Also, I have grandchildren of my own. Using a child to access assets. That crosses a line." Janet immediately filed emergency motions based on the new evidence, requesting a stay on all custody proceedings, pending investigation of Richard's financial motives and potential fraud. Meanwhile, Richard escalated his attacks. One evening, while Lily and I were at her piano lesson, my security system alerted me to movement in the house. Police responded to find evidence of a break-in, though nothing appeared to be stolen. The officer suggested it might be teenagers or random vandalism. 2 days later, I discovered why. During Lily's therapy session, mandated by the court to help her process the ongoing custody dispute, her therapist mentioned concerns about inappropriate materials found in my home. "What materials?" I asked, genuinely confused. The therapist looked uncomfortable. According to a report filed with Family Services, prescription drugs and alcohol were found accessible to Lily. I immediately realized what had happened. Someone had broken in not to steal, but to plant evidence. After the therapy session, I reviewed my security camera footage and discovered what the police had missed: a brief glimpse of Richard's cousin Steve, who had a key to my home from when he'd helped with repairs after Frank's death. The planted evidence, prescription bottles with the labels altered and liquor bottles placed in Lily's reach, had been photographed and submitted anonymously to Family Services, triggering another investigation. This time, I was prepared. The security footage, though partial, clearly showed someone entering my home during the time Lily and I were verifiably absent. Additionally, I had documentation of all my actual prescriptions, securely stored in a locked cabinet. The Family Services investigator, increasingly frustrated by the pattern of questionable reports, flagged the case for potential misuse of the reporting system. As Richard's tactics grew more disparity, his facade began to crack. During a supervised exchange for Lily's weekend visit, he berated me in front of both Lily and the court-appointed supervisor, making explicit threats about destroying me if I didn't drop the custody case. The supervisor immediately documented the incident, and Lily became increasingly anxious about visits with her father. During one weekend visit, she called me in tears, saying Richard and Denise had been fighting intensely and had said mean things about you, Grandma. When Lily returned, she revealed that Richard had coached her to tell the court evaluator that I sometimes forgot to feed her and frequently acted confused. The pressure had become too much, and she'd broken down during dinner, refusing to lie. He got really mad and said I was ungrateful, she told me, her small body tense with anxiety. Denise said maybe I should just stay with them permanently so I could learn to be a better daughter. I documented Lily's statements while arranging additional sessions with her therapist to help her process the emotional manipulation. The therapist, now seeing the pattern, became another ally, expressing concerns about the psychological impact of Richard's behavior on Lily. The culmination of Richard's increasingly erratic behavior came during a scheduled home evaluation. He arrived unannounced at my house the night before, demanding to inspect the premises. When I refused entry, he attempted to force his way inside, triggering my security system. The responding officers found Richard belligerent and smelling of alcohol. Though he wasn't arrested, the incident report noted his aggressive behavior and threats. When officers suggested he leave, he shouted, "This will be my house soon enough anyway," His outburst, captured by my security camera, provided the final piece of evidence Janet needed. The next day, she filed an emergency motion documenting the pattern of harassment, intimidation, and possible criminal behavior, including breaking and entering and attempting to frame me with planted evidence. Judge Thompson, faced with mounting evidence of misconduct, ordered a comprehensive investigation of all allegations and temporarily suspended Richard's visitation rights pending the results. "The scales are finally tipping," Janet said cautiously after the ruling. "But Richard still has connections and resources. We need to prepare for his counterattack." That counterattack came in the form of Judge Thompson's unexpected recusal from the case, citing a previously undisclosed conflict of interest. I later discovered through courthouse connections that Richard's attorney had leveraged personal ties with the judge's husband, who worked for the same pharmaceutical company as Denise. The case was reassigned to Judge Marshall, known for his by-the-book approach and intolerance for procedural manipulation. He ordered all evidence from both sides to be submitted for review before scheduling a final hearing. For the first time since the custody battle began, I felt a glimmer of genuine hope. Richard's web of manipulation was unraveling, exposing his true motivations and methods. The truth was finally emerging from the shadows of lies and manipulation. The courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky as I arrived for the final custody hearing. After months of investigations, evaluations, and legal maneuvers, today would determine Lily's future, and mine. Richard and Denise were already seated when I entered the courtroom, both dressed impeccably. Denise's pregnancy was now visibly advanced, her hand resting protectively on her belly, a visual reminder of the intact family they were promoting themselves as. The night before, Richard had made a last-ditch attempt to sway me, appearing at my door unannounced. "Martha, this has gone too far," he'd said, his tone conciliatory but eyes calculating. "We both want what's best for Lily. I'm prepared to offer you generous visitation and financial support if you drop your opposition to full custody." "This isn't a negotiation," I'd replied. "Lily isn't a business asset you can acquire through a deal." His facade had cracked then, revealing the desperation beneath. "You don't understand my situation. I need this resolved now." "I understand perfectly. Lewis and Frank explained your financial problems quite thoroughly." I'd closed the door on his surprised expression, knowing the mention of his former business partners would unsettle him. Now, in the courtroom, Richard avoided my gaze while whispering urgently to his attorney. Judge Marshall entered, and the proceedings began with a clinical review of the case history. Richard's attorney presented first, maintaining the narrative of the concerned father seeking stability for his daughter while expressing deep concern about my age and capacity. He referenced the inconclusive psychological evaluation and emphasized Richard and Denise's resources, stable marriage, and growing family. Lily deserves siblings, a mother and father figure, and the opportunities that Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds can provide, he concluded smoothly. When Janet stood to present our case, her approach was methodical and devastating. She began by addressing the original allegations about my competence, presenting medical records, school reports, and testimony from Lily's teachers, predating Richard's campaign. Each document contradicted the narrative Richard had constructed. Then she shifted to Richard's motives, introducing evidence of his financial difficulties and the timing of his custody filing, just weeks after discovering the details of Frank's estate planning. "Your Honor, this case has never been about Lily's welfare," Janet stated firmly. "It has been about accessing assets through custody rights, specifically Mrs. Reynolds' home equity and Lily's modest trust fund." Richard's attorney objected repeatedly, but each objection was overruled as Janet methodically connected documented facts. The evidence Frank and Lewis had provided proved particularly damaging, establishing a pattern of financial desperation and manipulation. When Janet introduced the security footage showing the break-in and subsequent false report to Family Services, Judge Marshall's expression darkened noticeably. "To be clear," he interrupted, "you're alleging that Mr. Reynolds orchestrated planting false evidence and then filed a fraudulent report to Family Services?" "The evidence supports that conclusion, Your Honor. Additionally, we have testimony from Mr. Reynolds' cousin Steve acknowledging his role in the incident under the belief he was helping Richard check on Lily's welfare." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat as his attorney attempted to distance him from the incident. "The most powerful testimony came from unexpected sources. Barbara, my neighbor who had initially reported on me for Richard, described how he had pressured and manipulated her into misrepresenting normal occurrences. Rebecca testified about Richard's explicit statements regarding his financial motivations for seeking custody, though Richard's attorney fought vigorously to have her testimony declared inadmissible due to their personal relationship. When Richard himself took the stand, Janet's cross-examination was precisely targeted. She led him through a series of questions about his business ventures, financial status, and the timing of his custody petition. With each response, she revealed contradictions between his testimony and documented facts. "Mr. Reynolds, can you explain why you told the court evaluator you were financially stable while simultaneously filing for bankruptcy protection for your business?" Richard's composure began to crack. "Those are separate matters. My personal finances are not relevant to my ability to care for my daughter. Yet you've listed your expected custody of Lily as a factor in 3 loan applications since initiating this case, specifically referencing access to a trust fund and property. Can you explain that discrepancy?" As Janet continued her methodical dismantling of Richard's claims, his responses became increasingly defensive and contradictory. When she presented emails between Richard and his attorney explicitly discussing using custody to access the grandmother's assets, Richard's facade completely collapsed. "You don't understand," he snapped, his voice rising. "Martha has been living off what should have been Samantha's inheritance, what should have come to Lily and me after Samantha's condition made her incapable. Frank always favored Martha over his own daughter." The courtroom fell silent at this outburst. Judge Marshall leaned forward. "Mr. Reynolds, are you suggesting you are entitled to your former father-in-law's assets?" Richard seemed to realize his mistake, but continued desperately. "I've been the one keeping contact with Samantha, paying for her rehabilitation attempts while Martha gave up on her. Lily belongs with her father, not an aging grandmother who'll need care herself soon enough." His attorney attempted to call a recess, but Richard was beyond control now, years of resentment and entitlement spilling out in a damaging monologue that revealed his true perspective on Lily, not as a child to be loved, but as a means to access resources he felt entitled to. Judge Marshall finally interrupted. "That's enough, Mr. Reynolds. I believe I have sufficient information to make my determination." After a brief recess, Judge Marshall delivered his ruling with clear distaste for the manipulation he'd witnessed. He awarded me full legal and physical custody of Lily, with Richard granted only supervised visitation pending completion of parenting classes and financial counseling. Additionally, he ordered a full investigation into the potentially criminal aspects of Richard's actions during the custody dispute. "This court takes a dim view of using children as pawns in financial schemes," Judge Marshall concluded. "Mrs. Reynolds has demonstrated consistent prioritization of Lily's welfare, while Mr. Reynolds has demonstrated consistent prioritization of his own interests. The contrast could not be more stark." As we left the courtroom, Richard brushed past me with a glare that held both fury and defeat. "This isn't over," he muttered. But it was over. The truth had finally prevailed over manipulation and lies. Lily would remain where she belonged, in the stable, loving home we had built together. The months following the custody ruling brought gradual healing to both Lily and me. The court ordered supervision of Richard's visitation, provided structure and safety, allowing Lily to maintain a relationship with her father without the manipulation and pressure that had characterized their recent interactions. Initially, Richard tested boundaries and attempted to circumvent restrictions, but Judge Marshall's clear consequences for non-compliance eventually forced a grudging adherence to the court orders. His financial situation deteriorated further when the IRS investigation expanded, resulting in significant penalties and restrictions on his business activities. Rebuilding relationships with family members proved more complex than the legal victory. Some, like my brother Michael, reached out with awkward attempts at reconciliation after Richard's true motivations were exposed. "I didn't understand what was really happening," Michael explained during an uncomfortable lunch meeting. "Richard convinced me you were becoming forgetful, potentially dangerous for Lily. He had documentation that seemed legitimate." I regarded my brother across the table, seeing both the boy I'd grown up with and the man who had betrayed me. "You chose to believe the worst about me, without even asking for my side. That's not something I can just forget." "I know," he acknowledged. "I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness, just a chance to rebuild trust over time." Others, like my sister Patricia, maintained their distance, too proud or embarrassed to acknowledge their role in Richard's scheme. Our family gatherings would never be the same, but perhaps they would eventually be healthier based on honest relationships rather than obligatory connections. For Lily, the aftermath required careful navigation. Her therapist, Dr. Sharma, helped her process the conflicting loyalties and manipulation she'd experienced. Lily's showing remarkable resilience, Dr. Sharma shared during one of our consultations. But she needs consistency and honesty moving forward. Children who experience adults manipulating truth often develop trust issues that can persist into adulthood. We established clear boundaries and expectations for all adults in Lily's life. Anyone who couldn't respect those boundaries, including family members, had limited access to her until they demonstrated trustworthiness. The community that had been turned against me gradually learned the truth as well. Principal Wilson issued a formal apology for her role in allowing unauthorized access to Lily's records. The school implemented new privacy protocols as a result of our case. My neighbor Barbara became an unexpected ally, speaking openly about how Richard had manipulated her and working to correct the false narrative she'd helped spread. I want people to understand how easy it is to become part of something harmful when someone exploits your vulnerabilities, she explained. The financial aftermath was challenging. Legal fees had depleted my savings, and rebuilding security would take time. Grace organized a discreet community fundraiser that helped cover immediate needs, while Janet reduced her final bill in recognition of the case's importance. More meaningful than financial recovery was the strengthening of genuine relationships. The ordeal had revealed who truly cared about Lily's welfare and who could be counted on in crisis. My circle was smaller now, but infinitely more reliable. 6 months after the final ruling, I joined a grandparents' rights advocacy group, using my experience to help others facing similar battles. The legal system was often stacked against grandparents raising grandchildren, particularly when financially privileged parents sought custody. Your documentation saved you, Judith reminded me during a support group meeting. So many grandparents don't know how to protect themselves until it's too late. I began compiling resources and creating educational materials for grandparents suddenly thrust into caregiving roles. The work provided purpose beyond my immediate family and connected me with others who truly understood the unique challenges we faced. Lily thrived as stability returned to our lives. Her academic performance improved, and her natural creativity blossomed once freed from the pressure of Richard's expectations. She developed a particular interest in gardening, spending hours helping tend the vegetables Frank had once grown. "Grandpa would be proud of your green thumb," I told her one afternoon as we harvested summer tomatoes. She considered this thoughtfully. "Do you think he can see us from heaven?" "I believe he can," I replied. "And I think he's very proud of how brave you've been." "You too, Grandma," she said, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Dad was really mean to you, but you never got mean back. That's hard." Her simple observation captured what I'd tried to model throughout the ordeal. Maintaining integrity, even when under attack. The lesson hadn't been intentional, but it was perhaps the most valuable one she could learn from our experience. 1 year after the final custody ruling, Lily came down with a genuine illness, a seasonal flu that had been circulating through her school. As I took her temperature and brought her chicken soup, the irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. "Grandma," she said weakly from her nest of blankets, "remember when I pretended to be sick because I was scared about the family tree project?" "I do," I answered, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "I'm not scared anymore," she said, drifting toward sleep. "Our family is complicated, but that's okay. Families don't have to be perfect to be good." In that moment, I realized we had both healed more than I'd recognized. The ordeal had taught us painful lessons about trust and betrayal, but also powerful ones about resilience, integrity, and the true meaning of family. Not always those connected by blood, but those who stand beside you when others walk away. As Lily slept, I sat beside her bed, reflecting on our journey. We had survived Richard's schemes, the legal battles, and family betrayals. We had emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the genuine relationships in our lives. The path forward wouldn't always be smooth. Richard would likely continue testing boundaries, and Lily would face the ongoing challenge of a parent who saw her primarily as a means to an end. But we now had tools, support systems, and hard-won wisdom to navigate those challenges. What have you learned about fighting for those you love through difficult circumstances? Has your family ever faced betrayal from within? Share your experiences in the comments below. If our story helped you in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience and family challenges. Remember, sometimes the families we build through loyalty and love prove stronger than those we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to stand firm when protecting those who depend on you.